This place is the only known Triassic sedimentary outcrop in Victoria. There's a lot more interstate, but this is the only one that tells that piece of time history in Victoria in sedimentary rocks. There are some other volcanic rocks that are the Triassic age, but they don't tell you what the surface was doing at the time, what the landscape was like and what the environmental values were. So this is quite significant to tell us that little piece of history of this place at that geological time.
We decided, and it's a small group and myself, that we should conserve this area. There is nothing in the whole of Victoria that can be given the same age in terms of sedimentary rocks.
It really is a good starting point to understand Australia's geological history. I guess like a mini, experience of nature. You get the geology and you get the native vegetation. Somewhere around the year 2000, Roger Pearson, one of our committee members, who is a geologist, came out to visit the Council Trench as part of a geology excursion.
I happened to be here doing some palynology on Bald Hill, which is just to our north, and I met a bloke from Moorabool Shire who said to me, in effect, do you know that the Council Trench at the bottom of Tramway Lane is going to be sold?
And this horrified Roger immediately and the rest of the geological community, and so they set about rescuing the reserve from being sold for private development.
It was an interesting timing of when this land came up for sale as surplus for government requirements, and I happened to be working in the department that was looking after that at the time, and because of my expert knowledge in geological heritage, we were able to mount an argument and say this place does have values worth retaining in the public estate.
And it took some time for us to convince the government that this area shouldn't be sold. The government had told us that if you want to maintain this area as a public reserve, you've got to form a committee and manage it.
And so we've got a committee with quite a few geologists on the committee, and they've retained their commitment to it, and Roger has retained his commitment to it, but I think it's thanks to him and his friends in the geological world that it's still a public reserve.
This site was obviously a test site where they dug a trench to see if the rock material was any good for quarrying. Unfortunately for them, they struck the Triassic material that isn't any good for building materials, but fortunately for us, they left it exposed, and now we have this excellent example of a small slice of history that's left in the landscape here in Bacchus Marsh. Triassic Park, as we call it, is just a wonderful place to come and visit to get a little snapshot of the Earth's history, a bit of an understanding of the landscape around us, how it's formed and what it is over the time periods that it's developed, but also environmental values like small patches of remnant forest and vegetation communities out here in the Bacchus Marsh area, and some of the special plants and animals here. From the rocks and materials that we have on site here, we can tell that it was a stream bed. A lot of the material is quite coarse, so the stream would have been flowing very fast at some periods of time to carry that coarse material through the stream. And there's also some finer periods of deposition with lighter mud sort of layers where it was a much quieter river. And some of those carry fossil materials, very rare fossils are still retained in a few places in those mudstone layers. And the age of the plants of those fossils tells us that it's Triassic aged rocks.
And they include ginkgos, they include horsetails and various other plants, some of which are extinct today. For example, ancient ferns, pines that no longer exist. You can't immediately see these things, but the interpretive signs tell you about them. And so the exciting thing about it is your connection to the story of the reserve.
The Council Trench was made a stone reserve in 1873. The vegetation is pretty much what was here in 1873, and it's very unusual in this area to find this small block of land that contains so much variety that's missing from the major areas around here that have been converted to farmland.
On the west side of the reserve, we've got a small area of rocky chenopod woodland, and we've got, for the rest of it, we've got basically a grassy plains woodland with a little bit of grey box and quite a few native herbs and grasses on it. To our south, the Yuyangs, which are Devonian, that's about 400 million years ago, roughly. Further out to our west is Werribee Gorge, which has got a whole lot of Ordovician sediment, which represents the ancient seabed that this once was. And if you want to get a bit closer in time, you've got a lot of Permian geology in the area. This little reserve we manage to retain the geology and the vegetation. However, it's also managed to enable people to come and visit it and to appreciate the story.
And it's just a nice picnic spot, a nice day to get out and have a little walk around and learn something new about the environment.